The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Firstly, I'll just check that everyone can hear us. So on the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a button that looks like a hand. So if you can hear me, just press that hand button and we'll see the hands going up at our end. Okay, looks like some hands are coming through. That's excellent. Looks like we can be heard. So I'm just going to pop your hands down now and just make sure that you can see the screen as well. We've got our presenter off-site today, so if you can just pop the hand button up again, if you can see supporting victims through police referrals up on your screen now. Okay, good. Everything is working. So welcome today to our webinar. So as I mentioned, we've got Chris Stafford, who's Acting Senior Sergeant at the QPS, speaking to us about supporting victims through police referrals. So before we get started though, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding this webinar. So in Brisbane, they are the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I wish to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. As this webinar is being viewed by people across Queensland and Australia, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and welcome any Indigenous people we have with us today viewing the webinar. So Chris is going to chat to us today about the work of the police referral services and how community legal centres can assist clients to access appropriate support from the Queensland Police Service. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you aren't able to view the live session, you can pop back on later to our website and download the recording. I've sent out the PowerPoints to everyone yesterday afternoon, and I've also uploaded them into the handouts section of the GoToWebinar control panel, so if you don't have those, you can download them now. What else do I need to go through? We'll be doing some questions at the end, as per usual. So if you've got questions, please type them into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. Or if you've got a microphone and you want to ask your question verbally, you can put up your hand at the end of the session and we'll be able to unmute you and allow you to ask your question. So I think without further ado, I might just hand over to Chris now to get started. So thank you, Chris. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Carly. As Carly said, my name is Chris Stafford. I'm the Acting Senior Sergeant who coordinates the police referrals service within the Queensland Police Service. So what we're going to look at today is just having a look at a bit about what police referrals is about and what we're doing, why we've been set up, and particularly looking at some of the changes that we've had to put in place around victim support and what we're doing to help victims of crime. So we're going to look at those obligations there. We'll have a look at some of the changes we're making to the police referral system, and I know that some of the service providers there are already engaged with police referrals. Across the state, I think we've got about 15 of the community legal services that are involved with police referrals, which is fantastic. But there's always room for more. So if throughout this presentation, at the end of it, you feel it's something that your legal centre could be involved in, then please feel free to contact us at the end. After we have a look at those changes, we'll have a look at who's currently involved and what we can do to have more people involved with us and what we're doing. So when we look at what we're doing with victims of crime, the biggest part of the police referral program is about reducing re-victimisation. So we all know that the impact of being a victim of a crime is far-reaching. When we look at things at different studies and inquiries, such as the Not Now, Not Ever report and the Carmody Child Protection Commission of Inquiry, one of the things that has come back very strongly in that is in relation to the ongoing impact of children witnessing or being a victim of crime through witnessing offences, And with the police referrals being a part of the domestic and family violence unit, one of the areas that we really are addressing in that area, or hoping to address in that area, is in relation to children witnessing domestic violence. So we see that the children living with family violence are more likely to go on to become victims or perpetrators of abuse. And that's been something that's come through a number of reports over the last couple of years. So that's not something new that we're currently or having to suddenly work with. It's something that we've been aware of for some time, and have put in place a number of processes over the years to try and address that issue. So if we're looking at that and keeping that in mind, and looking at police referrals, so police referrals commenced in December 2015, and was basically a rebuild of a couple of previous versions of a referral process. But the question has to be asked about why should or would police be refer people to support services. And the question gets asked, is it really the police officer's job to be making those referrals? But if we look at it from a purely as a common sense or operational viewpoint, police officers are a logical contact point to be offering people that earliest possible intervention. Police officers are having contact with over 1 million contacts a year with various people across the state, and these are generally with those people in their greatest time of need, or being there at that crisis point. And that's when police are able to deal with the initial issues, but then also making sure that people are able to get that follow-on support. And I suppose an indication of how far we've come is I recall in 1998 when I was located in Mackay, and we set up a program in Mackay very similar to what we've done here, just on a smaller scale. And we had about 40 service providers in Mackay alone that had agreed to come on board and be a part of our program. But I was told by one of my senior officers that what we were looking at was, or what we were doing is social work, not police work, and that we shouldn't be doing it. I'm really happy to be able to say that in the 20 years since then, the service has come a long way and realises that we do need to be doing this support for victims of crime, and making sure that we are able to provide that support to victims and get them the support that they need. But there's three key areas that we want to look at here as to why we're doing it. The first is operationally. It makes sense for us to be doing it. Okay, crime doesn't, and the whole purpose or the whole basis for police referrals is that crime doesn't just occur. There's always underlying issues impacting on the lives of individuals that significantly increase the likelihood of either offending or being a victim of crime. So when police are going to a domestic violence matter, it's not just a case of looking at it as being a domestic violence matter, but what's the underlying cause that's causing that explosion? Why is it that we're in that situation? Is it drug and alcohol issues? Is it gambling issues? Is it just financial pressures that are causing it? And these are all things that police need to be mindful of now. A big emphasis across the Queensland Police Service at the moment is that we can't just arrest our way out of everything. And domestic violence is a very strong example of that we can't arrest our way out of domestic violence. That's not going to resolve the situation. We need to look at what's causing that domestic violence to be happening, and if we can work on identifying and getting support for that underlying issue, then hopefully we can work towards reducing the incidence of the domestic violence as well. So by getting people into support services, victim rehabilitation is a key part of that. So by getting that victim into that rehabilitation or support service, that leads to them becoming a more resilient person or a stronger person, which by having that process can help reduce re-victimisation, because the person has become a stronger person, more resilient person, and also more aware of different situations and different circumstances, and being able to see what's happening. It makes the person proactive prevention can prevent further harm by resolving situations before they escalate. So again, looking at dealing with that, if it's a drug and alcohol issue, getting them that support so that we can work on that. And by making them a stronger person, it also makes them a stronger witness when it comes to the prosecution process. So as you're well aware, that prosecution process may be 12, 18 months after the incident has occurred. In that time, if the victim is able to get the support and become a stronger person, they're able to provide much stronger evidence when it comes to that court process. Police productivity can be improved by reducing the number of times we call back to the same address or the same people. If we can have that rehabilitation or getting people that support, getting them the services that they need, we're able to reduce the number of times that police have to keep going back to that same location, thereby improving our productivity. The community satisfaction rises as a result of the positive and supportive interactions with the police. We see that through the victims of crime surveys, which are done every couple of years, where we can see that satisfaction does improve, and a big part of that is about whether or not people are being kept informed and being offered support services by police when they go there. And it also manages the risk to the Queensland Police Service by making sure that we are complying with legislative requirements, which we'll look at shortly, and that we are providing that best possible service to all of our victims of crime. Strategically, it makes sense. So you can see in front of you there a copy of the Queensland Police Service strategic plan. I've highlighted and blown up a couple of the key outcomes and goals that directly are reflective of what the Police Referral Service is doing. Particularly those ones on the in the top right, where it talks about improving the police response to people who are overrepresented in the criminal justice system as either victims or offenders, particularly including vulnerable persons and victims of domestic and family violence. So that one goal there, or strategic goal, really reflects what police referrals is all about. But our overall vision, referring to delivering safe and secure communities through innovation, collaboration, and best practice, and that's what police referrals is. It's about using an innovative online system, collaborating with service providers across the state, getting people connected with those service providers, and it is best practice. We were recently identified by National Disabilities in relation to what we're doing with this service, and it is being used by other government departments now that are also looking at doing it, as well as some other states and territories are also starting to contact us about how we get, or how they get something similar to what we're doing here. So it's a strategic direction for the police service to make sure that this is being done and is being achieved as we are hoping it's done. And you can see there the performance indicators as well in relation to that increase in public perceptions and increase in satisfaction of people who've had contact with police. So that can be people not just as victims but also as perpetrators. And one of the things that we are seeing a lot is, particularly in domestic violence now, where we are referring a lot of perpetrators, we're seeing more and more of those perpetrators taking up those programs and being surprised by the fact that police are actually there to help them as well. and getting them into those programs to assist them with what they're doing as well, or assist them in changing their behaviours. Legislatively, it's a requirement. So in 2017, there was about 5 or 6 different pieces of legislation that had a real focus on changing the way we're dealing, particularly with victims of crime. The sections in the Bail Act, while not specifically about dealing with the victims, they were specifically around making sure the victims were kept as safe as possible. So in the Bail Act, particularly around sections 11 and 16, dealing with bail conditions and refusal of bail, was specifically about keeping victims of crime safer, and that was largely driven around domestic and family violence. So domestic and family violence changes that came in May. One of the big changes for us in that was in relation to information sharing and police officers being able to provide referral information, so personal details to specialist domestic and family violence service providers without the consent of that aggrieved or that respondent. So if police believe the respondent or that an aggrieved is in fear of their own safety, or there is a risk to that person's safety or their life, then police are able to get that contact details and the history of that aggrieved couple to a specialist domestic and family violence service without that person's consent. One of our big things with this, when police are looking at this, is that we are encouraging our police officers to make sure that there's a difference between non-consent and not informing. So we make sure that the first option is always to ask to get consent from the aggrieved, particularly to get their consent to refer them to those service providers. However, if they are asked and they decline that option, if police are satisfied that it meets the criteria outlined in Section 169F of the Domestic Family Violence Act, then we are able to provide that information to those service providers without their consent. The Victims of Crime Assistance Act that came in July was a very large piece of legislation changes that did have a bigger impact on the service. Big changes that came in with that were in relation to the creation of the Charter of Victims' Rights, which puts a very strong onus on police to do more in relation to keeping victims of crime advised of the status of investigations of court processes, making sure that they are provided with support service details and are put in contact with those support services. The changes also added victims of all domestic and family violence and elder abuse into the definition of a victim of a violent crime. So now every victim of domestic and family violence comes under that definition of a victim of violent crime under the Act. So they are also, there's also a requirement there now for police to provide that support details to every domestic and family violence victim. And it also introduced the requirement for, or the expectation that all victims of crime are to be able to provide a victim impact statement at their time of sentencing. So this is something else that has come in the past. Keeping victims of crime updated on the progress of investigations has largely been as a result of the victims contacting the investigating police to find out what's happening with it. This charter has turned that around now and put the onus on police to proactively keep everybody, all their victims of crime, victims of violent crime, up to date on the status of those investigations when someone's charged, any bail hearings, and any court processes as well. But we'll have a look at those things now. So when we look under the new charter, as I said, it's placed these obligations on all police now. So when we look at those things, hopefully the first one there about treating victims with respect, courtesy, compassion, dignity and privacy, hopefully we don't need a charter to tell us that that's supposed to happen or is to happen. But things like informing victims about any services and remedies, connecting victims to service providers for court support and victim impact statements, those couple of things there are all done now through the police referral service. Informing victims about police investigations, charging and prosecution processes, that should be a basic process of police work as far as keeping your victims engaged and letting them know what's happening in those investigations. Keeping victims informed of bail applications, outcomes, release arrangements and conditions. So if an offender is being released on bail, then there is a requirement for us to let the victim know that the person has been released on bail. And when the offender is incarcerated, if a victim is eligible, providing information regarding application to register with the Corrective Services Victim Register, so that they are also able to be or will be kept up to speed on when the person is moved as far as changing correctional facilities, when they're coming up for parole hearings, and if they're being released. So those obligations under the Charter apply to all government departments, as well as any not-for-profit organisations who are funded by government. So those requirements apply to everyone to keep victims up to date and supported throughout this process. So if we look at how police referrals is being leveraged to meet this, police referrals is a proactive police response. So it's about police taking extra bit of time to work out what the underlying issues are, taking that time to speak with the victims, to find out what's happening in their lives that's putting them where they are, and connecting them with those service providers. It's all run through through the police reporting and information management exchange, so QPrime, which you're probably all familiar with. So it's run through there, which is a really important process for us, because that means that the fact that this person has been referred or has accepted a referral or declined a referral is all now recorded within the occurrence of that. So if police go to a domestic violence matter and a referral is done or is offered, then it is recorded in QPrime, and it's recorded there as far as if it's been accepted, who the referral has been forwarded to. If it's been declined, then that will also be recorded in QPrime now as well, to show that the referral was offered and it was declined. We're getting prompts put into our police reporting. So the PIR system is a police information reporting system where when police are first attending jobs, that is recording the entry of the details. So when they're going through those initial entry details, we've got some prompts put in there, particularly for those offences which come under the Victims of Crime legislation, so those personal violent crimes, prompting officers there to remind them that they need to have made sure that they have offered a referral. Police referrals, we currently have 23 categories with about 68 subcategories making up those 23 categories. And we'll look at what those categories are shortly. Statewide provision, so for every one of those 23 categories, one of our key requirements is that there must be statewide service provision for that. So irrespective of where in the state police are dealing with somebody, we are able to provide them support. Obviously, in a lot of those cases, that support will be limited to telephone support. Obviously, our first preference is always to have a front door or a face-to-face local level service provider. But obviously, if we can't provide that face-to-face service, then a telephone service provider is always available that we can connect with And we've also set up now an automated referrals process with Victims Assist Queensland, and we'll have a look at that in a couple of slides' time to look at how we're working with that and what we're doing with Victims Assist Queensland. That's largely come about because of the changes in the definition in that victims assistance legislation, where by adding domestic and family violence into that definition, the number of referrals that we sent to Victims Assist Queensland last year was just over 1,000. In that same time, we did just over 23,000 domestic and family violence referrals. So now with all domestic and family violence aggrieved coming under that definition, every one of those 23,000 referrals will now also go to Victims Assist Queensland, and we will look at that shortly. So you can see there the 23 referral issue categories. Obviously, the key one here for you that we're looking at is just purely around the legal advice. So at the moment, legal advice is broken into 4 subcategories in relation to civil, criminal, domestic and family violence, and family law. In May, we'll be adding some extra subcategories, and an extra subcategory that will come under the legal advice will be in relation to the sexual assault counselling privilege, which we will also have a look at later on as to where that fits. So there's a range of different legal advice, not just criminal advice or domestic and family violence, but also looking at the family law and other civil law as well. But obviously, as I say, 23 there. Our biggest referral categories are the domestic and family violence aggrieved and domestic and family violence respondents. Both of those, like I said, we had just over 23,000 aggrieved referrals last year to different service providers across the state. But as you can see, we cover a lot of the underlying issues. So as I said, it's not just if police are going to a domestic and family violence incident, looking at to see what other issues are underlying it. So whether or not it's the gambling, drugs misuse, alcohol misuse, mental health. So looking at what other areas we can provide that support to. And then the biggest things to be looking at in that growth will come through with Victims Assist and victim support. So they're the big ones there that are going to be changed or where we will see big growth in the next 12 months. So when we're looking at who is a victim, so every offence will have multiple victims. In Queensland in the 2015-16 year, there were 30,000 or just under 31,000 reported offences against the person. In addition to that, there was just under 30,000 domestic violence applications done. So when we look at the fact that there was only 1,000 police referrals to Victims Assist Queensland, we can see there that there's going to be a huge growth. Even to have 29,000 DV applications, but only 23,000 referrals to support services, again, we're going to see a growth there as well. What we are starting to see more from police across the state is when we receive the details in relation to private applications. Our domestic and family violence coordinators are now contacting the aggrieved there and offering them that support through that process as well, which has been well taken up by a number of our domestic and family violence coordinators across the state to make sure that those aggrieved are also being offered that support and not just the ones that police are directly having contact with at the time of the crisis. So when we look at who is the victim, and this is coming under the Victims of Crime Assistance Act definitions, a victim doesn't only refer to the person who's been injured. They're obviously the primary victim, but there's also a range of other victims. And when we're looking at this, we're talking about the person who's been injured, remembering that injuries is physical and psychological. Okay, so it's not just a physical injury. So a witness or secondary victim is anyone who's witnessed it. So that can be anyone who saw or heard that act of violence. And this is where we're looking particularly around children who are witnessing domestic and family violence, that they are a victim of crime by witnessing that, and that they are to be provided support from that point in time to ensure that they are supported throughout that process. Again, also looking at witnesses to armed robberies, witnesses to assaults, and things like that. So making sure that people are made aware of that. The next category there about parents or secondary victims, the parent or primary carer of a victim who's under 18, who has been injured as a result of becoming aware of the act of violence. So if it's a primary carer of a victim who's been injured, if they've had to change, particularly looking there around if family members have had to stop work to care for a family member who's a victim of crime, then they're also indirectly being victimised as a result of that offence. So they come under this legislation. And then there's a related victim, so a close family member and financial dependent of a person who has died as a direct result of the act of violence. So this is looking at a person's partner, spouse, child, brother, sister, or parent. So if a person has died, those family members, again, are obviously psychologically a victim of that crime and are treated as being a victim of crime as well. So within the definition of an act of violence, you can see there the obvious offences which come under this definition. Clearly a crime or a series of related crimes, whether committed by one or more persons, that has occurred in Queensland and directly result in the death or injury to one or more persons. So because this is Queensland legislation, the Victims of Crime Assistance Act, the offence has to have happened in Queensland, but it doesn't necessarily need to be to a person who lives in Queensland. So if it's somebody up here, topically at the moment, if someone's in Queensland for the Commonwealth Games and they are the victim of a violent crime whilst they're in Queensland, even though they don't live in Queensland, they are still considered a victim of crime and come under this definition. The three offences that you can see on the bottom row that are in red are new offences that were brought in the changes to the legislation in July of last year. So specifically identifying the victims of domestic and family violence, elder abuse, and victims of dangerous operation of a motor vehicle causing GBH or death. So and that's one that a lot of people probably don't consider, that if someone has been injured in any way as a result of someone committing the offence of dangerous operation of a motor vehicle causing GBH or death, then again they come under that victim of crime. So those secondary victims that we just looked at, so family members, people who rely on them, are able to also come under that, and that again will include witnesses. So any witness to a dangerous operation of a motor vehicle that has led to GBH or death of another person comes under that definition and must be provided the support services. So the changes we're currently making to our police referral system are largely focused around making sure people are getting the support that they are required to get. So one of the things we've done, so this is the screen that police officers will see when they're doing a referral. And you can see there that it has the option there for one significant issue. Underneath it, that you can add a second significant issue. So police are able to do a referral there for 2 significant issues, but then also underneath that is contributing issues. So where police can add another 3 contributing issues. So in one referral, police can identify 5 issues for that person. So that may be someone who's got a drug problem, an alcohol problem, domestic violence issue, and anything. And then if it's a victim, if the person's also the victim of a crime, then doing your victims assist referral as well. So by doing one referral, we can have that going across to 5 or up to 5 different service providers in one go. But what we've done, or what will come in play in May, when a police officer does a referral for domestic and family violence for the aggrieved, or a referral for a victim of a crime, sexual assault matter, then a automated process will automatically send a referral to Victims Assist Queensland as well. So for every domestic violence matter that is, when there's a referral goes to a service provider, a secondary referral will automatically get sent to Victims Assist Queensland now to ensure that that service or that support is being done. So this is where we're saying that, or where we're going to see that the number of referrals going to Victims Assist Queensland will go from just over 1,000 last year up to around 23 to 25,000 referrals next year. So to help with that, we've also introduced some automation from Victims Assist Queensland side of it, where victims will automatically get an email back from Victims Assist Queensland letting them know that that they have received their referral and providing them with some links to initial reading, and then they will be able to contact Victims Assist Queensland to follow up with them when it suits them. One of the things that came from a recent survey or recent review with victims in relation to being offered referrals is that they felt that that immediate point in time wasn't when they were looking at contacting a service provider. So by introducing this process means that they will have their contact details and will be able to contact Victims Assist Queensland when they are ready and when they feel that they're up to going through that process with them. So this will go through, as I say, both domestic violence for the aggrieved as well as sexual assault referrals will automatically go to Victims Assist Queensland. The next step down from the automated one will be where police will be prompted onto whether or not they should be providing a referral to Victims Assist Queensland as well. So these will come under age support for elder abuse, court support for victims of crime, legal advice, sudden death support for family and friends, victim support for other offences against the person, and victim support for victims of offenders with mental illnesses. So when any of these categories are identified, the blue box that you can see at the bottom of your screen there will be prompting the police officer, has the referred person been involved in an act of violence against the person and require information on Victims Assist Queensland services. So police will have that prompt put up to them again about making sure that the victims of crime are being provided with that support service. The next one that we're looking at is looking at whether police officers will be able to identify whether or not they believe the victim just receiving the information package is sufficient, or whether or not they believe that the victim will also require a follow-up phone call. So if the police officer believes that the victim has the capacity to get the information and go through that information on their own, then they're able to make it as just send information only, or alternatively, they can make it send information and request or require Victims of Crime or Victims Assist Queensland to contact the victim and go through the process with them as well. And then there will also be a capacity for the police officer to deselect the Victims Assist Queensland referral if for some reason the victim of crime does not want a Victims Assist referral to be done. Obviously, all of these changes can only apply to a consent referral for domestic and family violence. So where we've introduced the domestic and family violence non-consent referrals, this process won't apply because the person has not consented to Victims Assist Queensland contacting them. However, if they consent to the referral, to the domestic and family violence referral, it will automatically go to Victims Assist Queensland unless they specifically say they don't want that to happen, and in which case the police officer can deselect that Victims Assist Queensland referral. As I said earlier, police officers are also to identify when an offer has been, when a referral has been offered and the person has declined it. This was done so that that will now be recorded in Q Prime that the referral was offered and declined. That way, there is a record that the offer has been made to the person for that support, and it will help us as far as managing that risk and ensuring that we are complying with the requirements of the Victims of Crime legislation. So police officers can clearly, as you can see, will put in offer declined. As soon as they do that, they are able to identify the referral category that they would have provided that referral for. We've also included a new category here. Instead of just offer declined, we've now made offer declined and information provided. So police officers will be able to provide victims of crime with contact details of services. So if they decline them at that point in time, police officers can give the support service contact details to the victim, and so the victim can contact the support service later on if they change their mind and want to do that. So we've introduced this new process here as well. So like I said, all of these changes are about making sure that we are meeting the requirements. The sexual assault counselling privilege, this is a new category that will come in, that will be shown from May when we do the changes then. At the moment, the process has been implemented since this legislation came in December, where at the moment it's going to Legal Aid Queensland as just as a criminal support or legal advice criminal support referral. To make that clear, from May it will have its own subcategory. So it will be a legal advice sexual assault counselling privilege referral. They will go initially directly to Legal Aid Queensland, who are subcontracting those out to other legal services. And I believe the sexual assault women's victims ones will go to the women's legal service, and I'm not sure who the male ones are going to, whether or not it's staying with Legal Aid Queensland at this stage. So and I'm not sure if we have anyone from Women's Legal Service online with us, but I know that we are very close to having Women's Legal Service signed up to join, to come on board with police referrals, to allow this process to run smoothly, to get those victims in contact with people from Women's Legal Service. So this sexual assault counselling comes back to police having a requirement to ensure that victims are making an informed decision on whether or not those counselling notes are being provided in a court process. There's a requirement there that they have to provide a written consent to do that, and part of the requirement is that they must be offered legal support or legal advice on whether or not that's the right decision for them to be making. So this process has been brought in place to assist with that. So our community legal centres that are involved, how many of you are aware of currently being involved with police referrals? So if you can type into your chat either a yes or a no, so that we can see how many people we currently have online. So if you put yes and the name of your service, that would be would be perfect.
So Chris, I might just jump in there because I can see the responses coming through, so it might just be easier for me to sort of mention the yeses and nos that we're getting. That's okay.
Yep.
So it looks like we've got so far 3 yeses. We've got 1, 2, 3 no's and a no but considering it from Mackay Regional CLC. So some of the people that have said yes, that have indicated where they're from, we've got Taylor Street Community Legal Service and Seniors Legal and Support Service. And we've got, some other CLCs from around the state saying yes there as well. So thank you for that, everyone. I'll just mute my again.
Thank you for that. So, so as we look through that, if we look at who we currently have on there, you can see the service providers that we're currently working with there. But if there is interest there, Mackay Community Legal Service, if you're wanting to become a part of the process and be involved with what we're doing here, please contact me or probably contact myself. My contact details are on the PowerPoint on the next screen, and we'd love to have a statewide coverage of legal services to be able to assist across the state with this. By having more and more local services on board, we don't have to rely on our statewide service provider to pick up that gap. Like I said, we will always prefer to have a local service that can provide that local advice to do these referrals. But if we can't find a local service provider, then we do go to a statewide service provider, who in this case will be Legal Aid Queensland. So you can see there 15 services or 15 legal services that we currently have on board with us, and it would be great to have everyone as part of it. But there's always one of the big things or big pieces of feedback we get when we're talking to services about coming on board is about having the capacity to take it on. We understand that. We understand everyone's very, very busy. So if you do have the capacity to work in this area with us, then we would love to hear from everybody about it. Like I say, the more we can have on, the better. So again, thank you to those service providers that we do have on board already, and looking forward to working with more. So there you have my contact details, my email address at the bottom of that. As I say, I'm the state coordinator for the police referral services. So we're only a small unit running a statewide process. But if there is anything that you want to know or want to know more about getting involved, please feel free to contact myself, and we're always happy to help. So if there's any questions, I think Carly's going to come back online with me. Yes. And if there's any questions, we can take from there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. That was really, really informative, and I was madly taking notes as well, because there are a lot of things that I wasn't aware of that you guys are now doing, such as the elder abuse work under VOCAP and also the dangerous operation of a motor vehicle. So that's really great to hear that you're sort of picking up all of that, and it looks like there's a hell of a lot of work ahead, particularly with the VAQ referrals.
The VAQ side of it's huge.
Yeah, so we'll keep a watching brief on that, and hopefully we'll have the rest of our community legal centres signing on where they've got capacity to be part of this program. That's right. So everyone, if you're out there sort of pondering your questions, I'll just remind you that there's two ways you can ask questions. You can type those questions into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can put your hand up if you've got a microphone by pressing the little hand button on the panel, and we can unmute you and hear your question verbally. But we'd love to take your questions. It's a really good opportunity while Chris is here, and we've got about 10 minutes left for the session to have some questions come through. So feel free to type them in for us. So just wait for those to come through, Chris.
Yep.
In the meantime, though, it was also really good to see some of the screenshots from the systems that you're using to record these referrals. I think, having that sort of practical stuff that we don't usually get to see is really helpful.
Yeah. So when police referrals were set up, the big criteria for that was that it had to be a fast process for police officers to do it.
Yeah.
So when it was set up, it's no more than a 3-minute, well, let's say 5-minute process for a police officer to do a referral. And that's been the biggest or the best thing about having it launching from our Q Prime system, in that by launching it from there, it automatically drags across all the personal information of the person that's being referred, so we don't have to sit there and double type it. And the other big thing is that being able to do it from their iPads. We've had situations where police have been at a job, done a referral on their iPad during the day, and whilst they're still there dealing with that victim, the victim has received a phone call from a support service saying that they've received a referral and getting them connected there and then. So that was an amazing result to be able to have that connection done before police had even left their house.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was an amazing result. So, yeah.
So, Chris, we've got a couple of questions that have now come through, so I'll just read those out and give you a chance to respond. So, Natalia has asked, or she sort of said, you say that you record the referrals. Does anyone else receive that report showing those referrals? Because I think that information might be quite useful. So I guess, is it just internally within police and then to the referral agencies, or are you going to publish some sort of report, perhaps in your annual report or something along those lines, around which agencies were receiving the referrals and how many referrals were made?
We do publish in the annual report the numbers of referrals that we're getting, and obviously we get like a paragraph in the whole report. So in our paragraph, we basically just cover the number of referrals made, with the number of issues that's addressed, and the number of people. So for the last 12 months, so for the period from the 1st of April last year through the 31st of March this year, that would read along the lines of we did 60,059 referrals, or referral reports, which led to 65,493 referrals. So that's referrals to each service, for 49,901 individuals. So the fact that there's 49,900 individuals and 60,000 referrals means that there's over 10,000 referrals there that have been for someone referred more than once in that year. So in a year, we'll see that there's people referred multiple times. So for that 49,000, only 42,414 of them only received one request, and it goes up to 537 received 4 or more referrals in that 12-month period. So that's where we're seeing police having to keep going back to those same addresses, the same locations, the same people.
Yes, right.
But yeah, so that's the only part of it that we actually report. We don't do any reporting as far as the outcomes from each service provider that we go to now.
Sure. Okay. So that leads on nicely to the next question from Jessica. What are the obligations of the organisation receiving the referral?
Okay, so we have a service agreement signed up with each service provider, and the obligations on that is that the service provider will make 3 attempts to contact the referred person in 2 business days. The referral comes through on our referral system. So it's a simple software package that the services use. So it records in there, and when the service provider contacts or attempts to make contact with the person, they record in there that they've tried to make contact, unable to contact, or whatever it is. And then after they've made those 3 attempts, if they've been unable to contact the person, there's a list of options there for an outcome, and that's about either made contact and the person accepted the service, made contact and the person declined the service. It was on referred to another service provider, so it may have gone to your service and you've looked at it and gone, oh, it's not really what we do, but it is what someone else does. So you can on refer through the system to that person. Whether or not it's the referral is just not applicable to you, in which case hopefully it would be on referred, or whether or not you've been unable to contact the person and information was sent. So if you're unable to contact the person, we do expect that there's either an email or a text message or something is sent to the person to show that you've been trying to contact them and asking them to contact you back. And then if they do contact you back after that, go back into the software and update saying that they contacted you and they've accepted the service. But that's the majority, largely what our requirements are as far as that goes.
Mm-hmm. And so do services, if it is a referral that's perhaps something that community legal centre isn't able to help with, do you sort of have an ongoing dialogue with those services so you can make sure the referrals are appropriate and that, you know, the client or the victim isn't sort of being sent around to many different places?
We contract an external service to do that coordination with all the service providers. So one of their responsibilities is monitoring what's happening with those referrals, and if it is that process where a service gets referrals and they look at it and go, oh, it's not really ours, and are referring it on, then making sure that that's being followed up. So we have an external service that we contract to look after that. Okay,
fantastic. Looks like that's all the questions that we have today, Chris. So what we might do now is wrap up today's webinar. Thank you so much for coming, for doing it from your own office, presenting for us today, Chris. As I mentioned before, that was really helpful, and I hope that everyone who's tuned in got a lot of benefit out of that and sort of a bit more understanding about what the QPS referrals team does and how they can work with your CLC as well. If you do have any other questions for Chris, or if you're interested in going on to the referrals list, please contact him, or if you've got anything else you wanted to contact me about, feel free to send that through and I can pass it on to Chris as well. So today's webinar, as I mentioned, has been recorded, so we'll be putting that up on our website this afternoon, and I'll send an email out to everyone who's registered with the relevant links. It would also be fantastic if you could provide your feedback, so there'll be a link in the email as well, just feedback to help us improve and monitor how the webinar program is going. So thank you again for attending, everyone, and for asking those great questions, and thanks, Chris, for presenting today.
Excellent.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.